that song.
What's up, people? Tell me you're joking. Another episode time, little South City, brand new rock and roll coming to us. Compliments of the guest. Go ahead, read your dashboard. You already did that. Got Mr. Marc Chechik here joining me. How's it going, Mark?
It's doing great, man. How are you, JB?
Good. How's so here I'm playing a little Melody Den, new release, Gospel Karma.
Yeah, it out officially March 8th, and did the show here locally. We've got a couple more coming up, and available on your favorite streaming platforms, as they say.
Yeah. So you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say go to the Evil Empire because you walked in. You actually handed me.
I had a disc, right?
You got a disc. I love it, man.
It's great, old school.
I know some of you guys are of the age that you probably have some littles running around. Do you just load them up as like Street Warriors and just stickers and CDs?
Man.
And
well, it's a complicated situation with my littles, but I will say, if they were they did that several years ago. They were actually evangelists, man. They were great. They came to the shows. I mean, the release shows. They had shirts, the swag, the whole thing. And it's just been a little bit of a strain in the last few years. But yeah, I think Dave has got grandkids now, and he's enlisting them. Jerry's got kids; they're grown.
Oh yeah,
And John, our drummer, is a teenager who is just learning to drive.
What's funny is like some of the listeners right now are like, wait, grandpa's. That was some real guitar. That's just
Grandpa plays guitar. That's such a good bumper sticker.
Right. GPG. Take it down to acronyms.
That's right.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you coming in. Sure. We were talking before we fired this all up here. Just a little bit of the motive behind it. I've known you casually for probably close to 10 years now.
Yeah.
We initially bumped into each other over there at The Gaslight.
We were supposed to do the rooftop concert.
Yeah.
And that.
Oh my God.
Nobody wanted to die.
Yeah, we the rooftops were. I think back to the rooftop concerts, and it just kind of is like it's a snapshot into the kind of problem solving that I would love to see our society.
Right.
Here we are, COVID. For those of you that are like, what the fuck is a rooftop? COVID, Gaslight, big old flat roof. And, we were hanging on by a thread because nobody could come inside.
Right.
So I'm like, well, wait a second. We have a roof, and that is an open parking lot. So we hauled our little mini PA upstairs, and we're like, well,
blasted it out. It was great.
Let's do it. And the funniest thing was just watching people drive by like, what the hell is going on here?
You're recreating Apple in 1968, right? You're doing that. And, the only thing missing was Billy Preston. It was cool. It's too bad we couldn't get up there, but we did the parking lot. That was cool.
Parking lots. Well, yeah, because it did rain, and apparently my roof held a little bit of water. So sorry, new buyer. It was water, quote, kind of tight. Well, I brought you in here because a couple weeks ago, I had originally reached out, and don't take offense to this, I'm sure you won't, but I reached out to Jorge, who is from Boxcar.
Right.
Because I've been super intrigued sitting in the cheap seats watching the spiral, so to speak, of KDHX.
Yeah.
And when he wasn't able to do it, I was kind of looking around, and the day that he was like, "Man, I'm really jammed up," you had wrote basically an op-ed.
Yeah.
That was published in Post, right?
Post-Dispatch, yeah.
Yeah, and it was really cool because it was pretty obviously timely, poignant. Just kind of addressing it from 10,000-foot view. And I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to let you kind of walk through that throughout this conversation. But I wanted to bring somebody in, and after that op-ed, I'm like, okay, here's a no-brainer. Because I think that the whole KDHX experience and lifespan, so to speak, is kind of a microcosm of a whole bunch of issues that we as a society have in general, but in St. Louis in particular. as far as being creative or supporting arts, or looking looking at the bigger picture of what does it really mean. So let me kind of start there and just toss you a softball question. When you hear KDHX, what does it mean to you, kind of in a timeline fashion? What did it mean to you, and what is it now?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's evolved and devolved, over the course of many years. So, give you context. I started when the station started with KDHX. I wasn't a jock, but I was doing a lot of freelance marketing. I just moved to St. Louis. A buddy of mine, Vince Cook, and I decided to go to this little community radio station and say, hey.
Over on Magnolia,
where we talked with Larry Weir, and we talked with, I think Bev was back there when they started, pretty close. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Larry. Yeah, it was definitely Larry. And we said, hey, do you guys need some promotion? We'll do posters, we'll do whatever, and we'll just get involved. Well, from there, I was playing in a couple different bands, and we started doing the midnight, live thing down in the studio with a couple bands, the Relatives, believe it or not. And the relationship became tighter and tighter, because as I got to know the jocks, I got to know Reuter, I got to know, Roy Cast and John Wendland, all of the, the cast of characters.
The OGs.
The OGs, yeah. And we ended up, the bands that I was in used KDHX as an amplifier, as the voice for our music, because it's, what a fucking amazing place. You release a song, and 2 days later it's on the air. I mean, it's incredible, the conduit that was happening. The support of the music was unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, everybody was playing stuff. Everybody was going to do it. They did benefits. We did tribute shows, all to raise money for the station. And bands were so willing to jump in and do it. And so that was a big part of the relationship. Fast forward to about 2008. And I was working with an art director friend of mine, Jen Halsky, and we created the Red Dot, as we all know it now. The KDHX Independent Music plays here.
Yep.
Along with a stupid number of billboards that only a handful ran, but just really cool shit about the shows, and each of the shows, like Artie Dwyer's show, all the hits, none of the time, his famous line, and the United States of Americana, that kind of thing. Really fun, clever lines that got the station noticed, and the Dot was probably the biggest thing, because it's still everywhere.
So let's talk a little bit about the time frame. Because KDHX, which I actually kind of love the acronym K double Helix Corp, right? That's a little punny. 87 it went originally on the air, and the time frame you're talking about is late 80s, early 90s. Mid 90s is when all of this was really manifesting. Yeah. And at the time, music was kind of in a little bit of no man's land, in my opinion. You're coming out of the mid 80s, early 80s, where alternative music was still really hard to find. Rock and roll was hair bands, quote, hard rock.
Yeah, we were a reflection of that. I mean, St. Louis, we had Pale Divine, we had Tupelo, we had all of, everything from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, and that's where I was going with this, because at that time, specifically, if we use 1990 as kind of a bogey or a benchmark, nationally, really globally, the only music that mattered globally was grunge.
Yeah.
Full stop. It was all coming out of Sub Pop. It was coming out of the Northwest.
Absolutely.
And KDHX, what it was doing at that time, because I was in high school, and I remember kind of popping through it, because there were two vintage vinyls in this world. The Loop, and then the prized possession in my beloved Granite City.
Yeah.
And Jim Utz and the team over there,
those go back.
And here's where I'm going with it, because you mentioned the art, KDHX. That Red Dot, I would argue, look, nothing is more popular, probably in national rock and roll, than Sweetmeat. KC95, That Pig,
you bet.
And what it meant to just rock and roll, period.
It still means.
Still, to this day. But KDHX has this unique position because, I travel a lot. You travel a lot. Yeah. You go to any, quote, cool city or not cool city, but if they have a cool bar, and especially a bathroom that is tagged, you're going to find a KDHX sticker.
You will.
And it's like within the music world or radio world, you have KDHX is up there, WXRP, right?
You've got...
I'm drawing blanks there.
Chicago still has...
WX.
And XRT's out in Seattle, right? I think.
Yeah,
that's it.
correct.
Yeah.
So anyway, here's my question to you, kind of like being part of, because it's one thing to come up with a super simple, iconic logo. It's another thing to have people working behind it that buoy it. You know, and you mentioned the names earlier. What do you think it was in those early days? Because in the early days, KC95 was still king of the pile.
You bet.
Coming up close behind, you had that little baby show with what was that British guy's name over on the point?
Les.
Les.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, he was great. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So within our market, those things were happening, and you also had at the same time 88.7 WSIE.
You bet.
Falls off of the cool radar. No offense, jazz lovers. And
they've really expanded.
And they switched its format.
You bet.
To jazz away from traditional college.
Smooth jazz.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. That's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about kind of the culture that was emanating, because again, you alluded to it. Each of these formats, it was playing rap, it was playing Americana, it was playing bluegrass, it was playing rock, it was playing alternative. It was all those things. Why do you think that lack of identity worked in a world where radio dials, you put it on a number, you know what you're going to hear? KDHX, that was not the case.
I think a part of it is, you know, you look at the formats and you look at the programming that goes on, like Casey, for example. I mean, Casey's a hits. It's you know, the standard 60s, 70s rock and roll, heavy rock and roll hits. And, you know,
all 43 of them.
Yeah. Well,
on repeat.
I don't know. If you go deep on Jethro Tull, you never know. But I mean, you know, you have an expectation. You know what you're going to get. You know what that's going to be. KDHX had a similar approach in that you could find what you wanted. You could find the things that you liked. But what was really cool about it is that you would branch out. You'd find yourself listening to the station, then suddenly it would seep into an afternoon where you go to ITAL or you go to bluegrass or music from the hills or something like that. Just random shit that you would pick up and you would suddenly go, wow. And in the process of all of that, you build this allegiance, you build this loyalty and this passion for the brand, right? And you know about that because you believe it's like, wow, this is so diverse. It's got so many different things.
Yeah.
The bigger thing on top of that is the people who were manning those shows were absolute experts. I mean, you talk to Caston about Americana, you're not going to find somebody smarter. Same with Wendland. You talk to Bob Reuter about blues, about other music that was developed, the garage bands, you've got, what is it now that's on Sirius XM? You've got Little Steven's Underground Garage.
Underground Garage, yeah.
I think Bob probably forgot more than anybody on that station knows. And he could introduce you to things that you would never hear ever, anywhere. And you'd never find it out for yourself. So that sense of discovery is what radio is all about. That's the whole point of, in the 40s and 50s and 60s is like somebody throws a track on and you're like, what the fuck is this?
Well, to your point too, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, the ability to, cut an album or a single or whatever somebody was doing at that time,
right?
Because it was a much different process than today. But they would be able to do that, and if they could get in front of Bob or get in front of somebody that is just a neighbor, right? Because they're all local individuals. You do go from factory plant floor to the retail shelf in 48 hours.
Yep. Extremely
unique, because if you were even attempting to do the same thing on any of the other formats that we mentioned earlier,
right?
Go kick rocks.
They did, but I give some credit. I mean, Casey did some, local kind of, push the local bands once in a while, and they would have a little slot, half an hour, whatever.
Buried at midnight on a Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody, we had what was it? KDHX did the same thing, but I think they did it for 2 hours, and they would just give local bands a chance to do it. You won't find that anymore. I mean, maybe WSI might do it at some point down the road, but that's not going to happen. I'll tell you what's interesting is, and I'm diverting a little bit, off-roading a bit. 107.3. Which is the classical station. You listen to them after 11 o'clock at night, and they're figuring it out. They're doing what KDHX used to do. They're starting to open the format. They're starting to bring KDHX former DJ. Andy Coco's on there. Mm-hmm. I mean, bringing people in.
Isn't he down in the islands hanging out with Big Mike or something too?
He was, or he is. I haven't seen him for a while, so he might be running.
Those guys live that.
He's running from the law, but
there you go.
To your point, yeah, it was it. there was truly an investment in the community from a local band standpoint. And the thing with KDHX, you're right. The conduit was, we just finished this track. We want to get it out there. We want you guys to be the first ones to do it. And they're like, yeah, sure. What the hell?
And hey, by the way, we're going to be at Mississippi Nights in a week, or we're going to be at Off-Broad.
Yep.
So there was this triangle synergy where you had the creator,
you bet,
you had the physical platforms, i.e., we got a live show coming up, but we need to get it in front of people, and there was no social media.
Well, it was starting, but you're right. I mean, you had the RFT, and that was okay if you could get in there and you knew the right people. I mean, you had the Post, which is, they could give a shit one way or the other. I mean, I'd take that back because Kevin Johnson was pretty, into it. Randall Roberts was part of that. I know that a lot of these guys doubled up and wrote for the RFT, but also wrote some stuff for the Post. But you're right. I mean, the landscape wasn't that great. If you're a band or you're an artist, unless you're touring nationally or you're a B-lister or you're doing regional.
Well, and the other thing that was going on, because I remember at the time was the live in studios, right?
Yeah.
As much as you would think that was a huge benefit for local artists, it was a better tool, though, in my opinion, for the touring artists, because in order to kind of generate legitimacy, you have to have these touring artists that are coming in and getting into the true lifeblood of the scene. Well, KDHX was the start and the finish when it came to the scene. And that created relationships. And the reciprocity from a lot of touring artists that would come in and they would become close with the station over the years. Kind of like what happened with Sammy Hagar and K-Shi, right?
You bet.
Sammy was,
They're
he was
one and the
fine,
same.
but he was nobody
until
K-Shi said, no, we're going to make you a superstar.
We're going to break you out of Montrose. Yeah. I mean, I think that we did. So in 1999, 98, I co-founded Undertow, which
Undertow
is
Records.
Undertow Records. Well, at the time it was the label's collective, but then it became Undertow Records. And then we were creating, it was a studio basically, but we were making music and allowing other artists to make music. At the time, it was Waterloo was one band and Nadine was the other band that was involved. And so
I
we were doing
remember
all that.
Nadine.
And so we did a lot of commercial work, and we got artists coming in there as well. But the thing to your point is that a lot of that went straight over to KDHX. A lot of that was like artists coming into town. Bob Dylan's people called, and said, "Hey, can we use your studio? Bob's touring through St. Louis. Can we do that stuff?" And it would generate on a bigger scale, not just KDHX. It would generate more credibility for the city. That's what I'm most proud of. Is that in those times, the city was really on the precipice of great music.
Well, and that's a great transition because people ask me a lot because obviously I've been around music for a long, long time, and there's always that stupid question. It's not the Beatles, Stones question, but it's like, who's your favorite? I don't have a favorite, but I would argue that I do, and if I'm being honest with myself, I have the most influential. And for me, being a middle schooler, that's because my neighbor, she was dating Jim Utz and some of the other guys over there. And so she was the one that introduced us to all, quote, cool music early. And KDHX was always on. And in the late 80s, the band that kind of changed everything for me as far as like, I never ever listened to lyrics until I heard them, and that was Uncle Tupelo. Mm-hmm. And when No Depression came out, I remember like listening to it, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, this sounds like this guy could be my neighbor. Right?
That's exactly right.
And something happened with them within Americana, right? That the timing was just right. Mm-hmm. I think there was a little bit of pushback from a pop standpoint against some, early grunge was cool, middle grunge was so-so, late grunge was really bad. And, and what was going on in that Americana scene was, look, that's when factories were really, this is all post-Reagan, right? Factories were truly starting to shut down. Unions were losing their power. Right. And these Rust Belt towns were kind of manifesting into what we, and Tupelo represented, in my world, like growing up in a steel town, I'm like, dude, they're like, that's our anthem. What
Tupelo did is, we could do another show on that, but at the end of the day, what Tupelo did was they just simply evolved from Woody Guthrie. I mean, it was just the same topics brought to modern day. And you also had an extraordinary chemistry of writers within that band, players within that band, and they figured out how to translate what they saw and felt and what their families saw and felt and be able to turn it into something that was accessible for people. And on a bigger scale, 3 fucking guys from Belleville, Illinois,
Right.
you know, are on playing on a national platform now, and that was no small. I mean, let's give Tony Margarita a lot of credit on that as well, because Tony pushed the hell out of them. But the thing is that they had the best writing, they had the best performances. They brought people together to be able to crystallize a lot of the thinking and the feeling about, you know, we're sick of this shit. Give us something that's real. Give us something that matters.
So that's why I want to tie this to KDHX.
Sure.
Because without KDHX, I would argue Uncle Tupelo does not do what they do, and we, in my opinion, would never have seen Wilco Sunvolt by default.
I agree.
When you think of those early days, speaking to genre, you know, because again, it was a station that was pulling and pushing every format.
Exactly.
In my opinion, Americana was the big winner. How do you view, you know, if we were to rank for lack of a better term,
Genres
and KDHX's role, especially in those early days, as far as who came out on the back end?
I think there are a couple things in play here. One, Americana, you're absolutely right. I think it's a little bit more roots to Americana, and I'm not going to slice this thing too thin. But there is some distinction from a singer-songwriter to Americana, because Americana generally leads into a Jayhawks, Tupelo, Bottle Rocketsy sort of discussion. It's a band thing. It's more the aesthetic of the fabric of what our city's about. And they're singer-songwriters. They'll always be around. But I think Americana was probably the torch that KDHX pushed. You got Reuter, who was doing a lot of that. Roy Caston was doing a lot of it. John Wendland was doing a lot of it. There were a couple other jocks who were doing it as well. And that seemed to be where they fell, because it was, local. That's a big part of it. Rockets were doing stuff. Tupelo was doing stuff. But the other side of that was blues. And what KDHX did was broke some seriously good artists, great artists in some cases. You know, in the late 80s, early 90s, they were one of the first stations in the country to play Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy, even though back in the early 80s, right? They started in 87, but they got him amplified even more. Local artists, Tommy Bankhead, people like that, they taught people why this city was so meaningful coming up. So blues has always been a mainstay in this city. It's part of the brick, right? But to your point, the genre that really stood out is Americana, or was Americana. And what that brought was a sensibility about KDHX, and it brought a sensibility about the station and the people and the artists and everybody involved, which is why, kind of like in that 90s area you were talking about, you saw this proliferation of Americana /roots that. And part of it came out of grunge getting a little slap back on that. It was still heavy, but
everybody wanted to get back to quote roots,
right?
You know,
exactly.
I want to be real, you know, and so
good luck.
yeah. So let me ask you this then. Speaking the whole Americana /blues debate, and I don't see it as a contentious one, but I think it's one of those things where St. Louis as a region, we're really poor at being self-aware. You know, when you zoom out,
right?
You know, hearing you talk about the blues and the names that you were dropping and kind of the relevance here locally, I'm shaking my head in agreement, but at the same time, like, I was living in Chicago from roughly 97 through 04, 05 in the South Loop working. Well, Buddy Guys was, you know, on the corner behind us.
Well, there's blues capital B and there's blues lowercase.
Exactly. And I think that, you know, from a national perspective, as much as the purists knew St. Louis was relevant, the quote pop or mainstream or accessible market, you know, why am I going to go to 1B?
Yeah.
And that's what happened. Whereas Americana, here's the funny thing,
it broke molds. I
mean, we St. Louisans through Bell Vegas boys, you know, and even like you know, some regionally other bands that were moving, we were outpacing Chicago for the first time in a genre.
It was incredible. What was great was that we were playing Chicago far more too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the thing about Americana is, you know, people talk about it. You know, well, you know, in the little quadrants of the Jayhawks in Minneapolis, and in Chicago you have who was there? My brain's dead. But you know, St. Louis had more of that credibility from that standpoint, and I think that's a big part of it. To the things we were talking about before, you know, jobs are gone. Factories are gone, industry's gone. A lot of the economic downturn of the city was going on. And there was writing and performances coming out of that inspiration. I think that's why it was real for a lot of people, and that's why St. Louis did it better than anybody else in the country. I mean, you know, yeah, you could argue Bakersfield and you could argue California and all that. That's not Americana.
It's different.
It's not. You can replicate the sound. I mean, you know, Sid Griffin and Long Riders. I mean, that's a good example. They were out there. Alejandro Escovedo's part of that as well. But in terms of the real grit of the city and what the city did, is it pushed it forward in the sense of this is very real storytelling, and it was a different aesthetic of the storytelling coming from the Midwest. So
yeah, you know, and I think that it was kind of like unfortunate. Take a band and a song, for example, like Indianapolis by Bottle Rockets.
Yeah.
All of us that heard that song for the first time, and anybody within the central time zone north of Arkansas,
Right.
We all lived and know that song.
You bet.
And I think part of the problem is that where we just couldn't break out bigger, we being Americana in general and Midwest bands in particular, people on the coast, when they hear those stories, they're depressing. They
Absolutely.
Cognitive dissonance. We do not want to admit that is real in our worlds.
For some, it's depressing. For people like us, it's galvanizing, right? I mean, because it's talking about shit we know. It's talking about shit we've experienced. You know, I mean, you listen to Whiskey Bottle by Uncle Tupelo, and it's, you know,
that was my college theme. That was my college theme song.
Yeah, the sign says quite plain. Somehow life goes on in a place. So, you know, and all of that is something we identify with, and that's why it's stronger and resonates more for us. You're right about the coast.
Morning comes twice a day, or not at all. You know,
one of the best songs. Yeah, Jay has a way with a lyric.
So here's I want to bring it back to the whole St. Louis self-awareness thing. A couple of years ago, this was back in the Gaslight days. There was a crew of people that were coming in from MLS. I'm going to tell you the story, and I'm going to get your take on it. So the home office, New York, MLS, that's the pro soccer league, for those of you that are wondering, what is he talking about? The local team had reached out to me, and they were like, hey, the league is coming in. They want to help us try and get this thing off the ground. They want to better understand what's our culture, what's our taste, what's our brand, what's our story.
Yeah.
And so his idea was to bring in a group of maybe 15, quote, I hate this term, influencers, you know, and put in a round table, and they came to Gaslight. We were all sitting in the live room,
right?
You know, trying to be cool. And they were running around the room, and these people from New York were asking questions. Okay, hey, if you were to describe St. Louis, what would you say are your top 3 characteristics? You know, just it felt like a complete interview. But for the sake of this conversation, there was a point in that process where they were like, okay, let's talk about music. What music defines, you know, or defines / most popular within your market? And I sat back. I'm like, okay, you know.
I'm going to hear what everybody was going to say.
And I'm like, okay, let's see where we're going with this. And inevitably, you know, of the 15, 14 were like jazz, blues, you know, just roots music.
Right.
And I was kind of sitting there cockhead. I can't hide my disdain easily in public.
Yeah.
And the mediator's like, JB, you know, we're in your studio. What's your thought? And I'm like, it's country music, guys. That's what our region is. It's country music. And they, of course, they were all poo-pooing me. And I'm like, look, numbers don't lie. Our demographic doesn't lie.
Mm-hmm.
I said, if you look at the terrestrial radio, you take the 2, the Bull and WIL, you add up their reach. You can add up all of the jazz, all of the pop, all the R&B. You can even add in the hip-hop stations. Mm-hmm. They still don't touch the reach that country programming does. And oh, by the way, if we go on that Kings Highway Bridge out there, take a little field trip, and look 20 miles in any direction, what are we going to find?
Yeah.
Farm fields.
That's it.
And my, like, this is where, when it comes to music within our marketplace, here's where I'm going with this. Do we get in our own way in an attempt to try and make something what we want it to be, as far as like our identity, our roots, music, heritage, all of that, because we believe it to be true? Do we want it to be cool, or is it just obstinance? Because if we were to like take taste out of our own head and look at what the market is telling us, it's telling us a different story.
So
Okay, we're back. We were talking about what we think, what we want, and what's real.
and eventually we'll talk about how that all came together with KDHX in a lot of ways. I think to your point, it's country would be not. I don't know so much anymore. I think we are a city of confused music, heritage, and culture right now. Only because there isn't anything that we can identify. We listen to what we like. KDH, and this goes to the KDHX story, and here's why.
Yeah, that's where I was going with
this. Yeah, it helped us define, us being all of St. Louis, who listened to that station, who was bothered, who bothered to listen. It helped us define what we are in our identity from a musical standpoint, cultural. They covered everything that this city represents. Whether you define yourself as a blues thing or as a country or alt country or roots or jazz or whatever it is, St. Louis has had influences in all of that. And I think it comes down to the fact that as long as those musical genres are continued forward and are moved forward and are always being exposed, there's going to be new generations who are going to happen into it, who are going to discover it. That's how the station became a beacon for a lot of people. Is that, their kids and their kids are listening to something that they've never heard before. You go to a hip hop show and then you go to a, Indian, Bangladesh, whatever, program, and you are exposed to so many cultures. It brought a lot of people together. Now we're just isolated. Now we don't have that as a conduit anymore. So what do we get stuck with?
Yeah. I was thinking the other day, like in kind of anticipation of this conversation along the lines of identity. And I was, at the same time, I'm scrolling, of course, multitasking. And I saw an advertisement for a band for a show that's up in Chicago that I really want to go to. And it was an aha moment for me because it's one of these little compare, contrast. And when you think of the next gen or the current gen that is consuming music, entertainment in particular, would they, if I were to say, which would you prefer, the Smithsonian or the Salt Shed? they're going to say Salt Shed. They probably don't even know what the Smithsonian is.
Right.
And in my head, because I have adult ADD, I'm like, that's kind of parallel to the issue that we have here as I see it.
Yeah.
We're constantly trying to integrate our, quote, history, our heritage, our roots, and expect that the potential consumer who does not care about music the way any of us cares about music,
right,
we think that just because we educate them on what they should like or what they should respect, that's going to equate into ticket sales.
No.
And it doesn't. So KDHX.
Yeah.
For the past, what are we going on? 3 years, 4 years?
2.5-ish.
About 3 years.
Yeah.
I've saw that standoff as being a component or kind of a parallel to that kind of compare contrast that I had in my head, where you have individuals that view maybe the X's and O's in black and white terms. Then you had individuals that viewed the purity of what it should be or what they wanted to be or a return to. And then there was probably somewhere in the middle the reality of what was going within our market as it applied to KDHX. And I don't want to get into the weeds of,
it's not a he said, she said.
Yeah.
It's philosophical and what's changed on it.
So you were there in the first inning and you were fighting for it all the way up into the bottom of the ninth. What do you think changed as far as KDHX's ability to thrive?
That's a extraordinarily good question. I think what changed was the landscape of people that were involved. And I'm not pointing fingers here, but I think what happened is that a lot of the people early on, the passion for what they did was unmatched. I mean, it's not a cagey job. It's not a DJ, 4-hour shift where I get paid for what I do and that
It's
kind
all
of thing.
volunteer.
Yeah, it's all volunteer. So you're there for a reason. You're there because you care. I think that what happened was management got to a point where they got so involved with who they had to answer to, because the station was never, it wasn't a fucking profit machine ever. It was always going to need help. And that's why they did the pledge drives, but they always had help. But the point of it is, I think what they started to see happening was management started to recognize that they didn't have the ability to keep this thing in a sustainable, model. And the more they tried to shift it a little bit to that, sustainable model, the less it became independent, the less it became, a reflection of our community. And that was a pretty subtle shift over time. When all the shit went down 2 years ago, then that was sort of the exclamation point at the end of the process, that happened. I think the station was relevant for a very long time for a lot of people. It taught a lot of people about music. I think that relevance disappeared, ironically and scarily, with the administrations that we've seen, from a political standpoint. What we're seeing today, literally today, is unlike anything this country's ever seen, truly.
Well, and compound that with the full integration of social media and
no question.
And I'm going to say the S word, Spotify in particular.
You don't, I heard a number. Actually, I read it. It was about a month ago, where the amount of music released in one day in 2024 was the equivalent of 1996, everything in 1996, which is just fucing mind-blowing.
Yeah, I've heard the range is 45 to 70,000 singles a day are released on digital platforms.
So the question is, how do you recognize that and are able to work within that and to be able to expose people to new music and create something that people really want to listen to? Well, the whole point of KDHX, it's like a lazy Susan of music, right? I mean, it's here. You're not getting one style 24/7. You're getting everything. And that's how people learned and how people grew to understand our culture and grew to understand what music is really about, because they had so much exposure for it.
So let's talk about viability. I'm going to get into the numbers a little bit, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know kind of the bigger picture as far as where it was coming from and the culture war that created within the station. When these fundraising drives would go, you have your 2-hour segments, and each show has a demographic that listens.
You bet.
Well, it's not hard to figure out which demographic is paying more of the bills than other bills. And, whether it's, good idea, bad idea, shitty PR, or awful PR, the clash between a lot of the roots, African-American voices on the station,
right,
and that group were at odds with the director in what I would call white bread genres to a degree. That's how it was coming out in socials in particular, and releases, and and contextual arguments between the two, like, oh, we're being shut out, oh, this is racist, or this is isolationist, etc. But I always tried to zoom out and okay, if I'm on that board, and to your point earlier, if you are doing fund drives and those are flatline, maybe even ticking up a little bit, but your inflationary costs to keep the station, to run the station, to improve the gear, all that stuff is far outpacing what is coming in the door. At least that's what was public. You have to make hard decisions. Where did you see that battle in addressing fiscal responsibility? Hey, look, if we don't make changes, we got to flip the switch off right now, versus doing, quote, the right thing as it pertained to equity and inclusion and genres.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the station, well, let me just say this. I think that the station has always been inclusive. I think the station's always had breadth and depth across genres of music that impacted, every societal, group you could think of, right? I mean, from African American, Hispanic. I mean, if you go back and start looking at the shows, you're going to see an astounding rainbow going on there.
Wait, what was the Brazilian show?
Oh yeah, that was Andrea's show, right? And Andrea Dunn, who was in charge of raising money. So, I think the station's issues were greatly overestimated by current management to the point where they felt the station should have done more about. Let me reframe that a little bit. I don't think that the station was having that many problems, to be honest. I knew there were disagreements. I knew there were issues. I think what happened was somebody had a fiefdom. Somebody wanted to do that. And you go to the pledge drives and you look at the numbers. Go back 5 years and you look at the numbers. They were making the numbers.
Yep.
And when you get people involved who wanted to shift it and become hip and become a lot more relevant culturally, well, it's bullshit, frankly, because the station was already relevant culturally. If you found it, you discovered it, you could figure it out, you learn things, you pick things up, and it catered to everybody, not just one group. It's not a Keishi. Not that Keishi does that, but,
Right.
The point of it is that management felt, well, we just weren't, either diverse enough or we didn't push out enough. We didn't expand our walls and our borders culturally enough to make this, to please us, basically, as the board. Somebody got sold a line of goods as a result of that. That started the slippery slope of, well, we don't need the Papa Rays, and we don't need the Roy Castons, and we don't need Dre. We don't need to be playing this old people hippie music anymore. This is for older people. We need to get hip. We need to get young. We need to be relevant to the community. Well,
right.
The surprise is we already fucking were relevant to the community.
Well, to your point, like when it, and I saw that happening too. And I'm zooming out in my own little world as I'm drinking my morning coffee back in the day, and I'm like, okay, I understand what they're trying to do. I understand that they're viewing everything as cyclical markets, specifically in pop culture. You have to reload. By reload meaning you got to go young at some point because eventually old people are gone, and you're gonna switch it around. Now the problem is what we addressed earlier, and that is the total technical cultural zeitgeist that occurred via Spotify, digital distribution, and kids' interest. They're not turning on a radio.
But here's the other side of this, and if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of the finances of this, who is supporting the station?
Yeah.
Look at these pledge drives. Look at who they are. 35 plus, 40 plus.
Yeah, that was my part B. It's like, okay, so let's go and get a bunch of teenagers to listen to a terrestrial radio station because they're going to love it so much. They're going to Venmo us their grass cutting money. That was never going to happen.
No, not even close. And the whole point of it, the whole point of it was, you cut off the hand that feeds you, I guess, is what it was. Is that older people had disposable income. We have real jobs. Teenagers don't have real jobs. We have real jobs. We have disposable income. We can pay. We can donate. We can contribute. We can put things on. We are tied into the community. We can do shows and benefits. And everybody in this community who listened to the station, who knew the station, supported the station. Yeah. They supported it. So they would do whatever it took to be able to get this station going forward. They knew that there were always going to be financial challenges. Any community radio station in the country faces those. But we had a very loyal and stalwart audience of people who were willing to do that. When you start pushing out and saying, well, we need to be broader and all of that, yeah, cool. But it's done in steps, not in wholesale changes of firing 13 people in one shot, man. You can't do that shit because these are the people, if you look deep, they bring the money in. They're the ones that support the station. Do it, evolve it, which is exactly how the station came about.
Yeah.
So they didn't do that. They just, made a decision to do it unilateral because there's all sorts of reasons behind that.
It feels like the original Liberation Day in which we're not going to focus on the one sole problem we have. We're gonna tariff everybody.
Yeah.
Well, right? So let's talk about those 12, 13 DJs that really kind of when they were let go, that's when shit really hit the fan.
Yeah,
publicly. Let's take a second and let's play devil's advocate. Let's say that there was value in the decision somewhere as it pertained to things that they could have or should have been doing. For a moment of maybe self-reflection, being the public defender here, what's something that crew maybe possibly could have been doing differently to either A, shift the Titanic a little bit, or B, just simply improve upon their role within the station?
Yeah, I think part of it is you have to balance, right? Because the people who were let go, all were prominent DJs.
Yes.
They all had shows. They all had shows that had loyal and dedicated followers. I think they represented collectively, what the station shouldn't be anymore. That was the view of management and the board. What they could have done differently, and this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, and if you're listening,
they could have fought back. They could have. Yeah. They get let go. You get let go for what? And you're told that because you're a racist? I mean, those are quotes. Those are in the press. You saw that. I mean, that was shit that was said by the people on the board because this DJ was saying racial things and doing this. First thing I would have done is I would have tied him up in court and I would have sued him for slander because that's exactly what it was, or libel. And I would have said, don't fuck with me like this. This is what I do. This is something I am passionate and love and do it. You want to fuck with me? I'll fuck with you. And I know that sounds like a really slapback thing, but the Democratic Party is a great example, right?
Yeah.
We just sit there. We sit on our fucking hands.
I'm sorry.
We don't do anything. We don't get out there. Now people are starting to do it. People are starting to realize, their 401k has been cut by 40% over the last 5 days. Fuck. They're out there protesting now. They're getting the voices heard, and you get a bunch of moderate Republicans who are going to start coming over and saying, yeah, fuck you guys. We're not going to follow you, down the Trump path. Back to the station. I think they should have gotten aggressive. I think they should have gotten more aggressive and fought back with management, brought in the attorneys early, done all of those things to say, look, we serve a vital part of this city. We serve a vital part of our culture. You are wholesaling, taking this out of a station that is a community fucking radio station. I'm not going to stand for it. We bring in 70% of the money for this station. Those 13 DJs are responsible for a lot of that. They should have stood up and done something a little bit more aggressively than they did. I think they got around to it. I'm not faulting them at all. They got torpedoed by something that they just couldn't fathom was happening within this beautiful thing that was created.
So let's go back to maybe root cause, or at least the argument that was being laid out there. We alluded to it generically in so much that they were, we need, quote, new faces, maybe a new direction, whatever they were saying. In your opinion, like, what would that future have even looked like in a modern music era in which, genres are so fluid? Case in point, the amount of, hip hop artists that are interjecting in the country, and the amount of pop artists that are doing hip hop. Everything is just homogenous to a large degree, right? And the station was prided upon not homogeny, but literally these mini silos that all put together look like a big old bullet.
Yeah.
What did they think they were really going to do? What direction would the airwaves, where were they trying to take them?
Well, the way you described it is spot on. I mean, I think you're dealing with a melting pot of musical genres, right, that were taking place. And music is maybe the least of the issues right now. It's philosophically what happened from a management standpoint of taking something and being more relevant than they thought, the station was. What was the long-term plan from a format standpoint? Who the fuck knows? I have no clue.
Do you think it's one of those cases too where...
I mean, to your point, if you've got that many genres going on, you've got people who are experts within a certain genre and are able to articulate that and be able to, amplify that. Those are the people that are going to keep the station relevant, because that's what people are listening to it. If they don't, they've got somewhere else to go.
So let me give you an analogy. Just get your take on, maybe the players involved. My other passion, soccer. My soccer dad pod is my muse. Via that show, and what I've always known, because I've been around the game and the fields and the clubs and all of that my whole life, is that the clubs that do tend to thrive, pro teams that tend to thrive, have leadership, GM and above, right, that typically are not soccer guys, because they're looking at the bigger picture, right, as to human relationships, people in the right fit, things like that, where they're much more strategic. KDHX in the last few years had individuals that I believe were too close to music by either being performers themselves, and inevitably they have.
Are you saying in the management level?
I'm saying bias. They have bias.
Mm-hmm.
That, again, and this is my cheap seat view from my cheap seat reading. Look, Kelly, the rest of the crew,
Mm-hmm.
like, we all know what they were doing on the side or what their passion was,
Mm-hmm.
and they were trying to run a business in which everybody has an opinion as to what is best. Do you think that maybe KDHX didn't have enough people that were truly outsiders looking at it, that maybe they were brand specialists, maybe they were marketing specialists, or could have been, that if they would have went that route, it wouldn't have felt so contentious?
Well, without this getting into, kind of a mudslinging thing, look, at the end of the day, I worked with Bev Hacker for a long time before, Kelly's predecessor. And, everybody has their flaws. Everybody has their, moments where they're not, shining per se.
Mm-hmm.
But what Bev had was the belief and the ability to galvanize people, to bring people together. And maybe she was a little polarizing at times, but she kept the station going forward, not backward. Kelly had an agenda and has an agenda, and that agenda is being played out right now. And this isn't being accusatory. It's simply stating the truth, is that when somebody gets into power, they get power. And they get drunk with power, and they get to a point where they feel that it is their decision to do everything that they want to do, okay? There's all kinds of interesting medical terms for people like that.
Are we talking about Trump? Who are we talking about right now?
Perfect. Well, that's the whole beauty of all of this, is you got this, community radio station that has, these different styles of music and all of these different attitudes and beliefs, and the person that's leading it has become literally sycophantic. I mean, she is what Trump is, and I think I'll probably get my ass handed to me for saying that. But look, if you look at the circumstances, you look at everything that's happened from a chronological standpoint over the course of the last 4 to 5 years, the power play that's being involved and the unilateral decision-making that's taking place in a board, otherwise known as a cabinet, that is, a puppet.
Well, it's the whole, we are a representative democracy, not a true democracy, and the plurality of power ruled.
What you are seeing happen is money. It's really that simple. It comes down to money. It comes down to, you're dealing with somebody who's, the station manager who's making 6 figures, who, we're struggling. Oh, well, I'm making $100K, and that's the kind of shit and mentality that people are railing against, A, and B, is really truly torpedoing the station and making the station go downhill. The station's going to be gone, in my opinion. I love the station. I don't think it's going to last. And the reason I don't think it's going to last is no matter how strong we, the people who believe in it, put up a fight, to your earlier point, who cares?
Well,
we found other routes. We've found other places, either within the airwaves or outside the airwaves. We've changed our styles. We've changed our mode. We've changed all of our routines. Every morning, I would get up and listen to John or Roy or whoever it was, and I would listen because I knew I could hear certain things and do that. Those routines, screw streaming. That's not going to happen. People do, but there was something about the airwaves. There was something about that station bringing people as a beacon together. It doesn't happen anymore, so we find alternate routes. So what do? We listen to other local stations. No, nothing's really even that close. Personally, I listen to the fucking classical station because the music's great, and I don't really feel a kinship with SIE or KWMU or whoever else. I'm one of the disenfranchised, and I think that's what's happened to thousands of people who like the station.
Yeah, and I'm going to give a shout out to my friend of mine. He's you know who Shane Presley is?
Sure.
Okay. Another individual in that, in that world that I think just gives 1,000% more than they take is Tony Willingham. Beyond FM, and here's where I'm going with this. He's been doing that for a long time. It's a digital radio station, and he literally, if you're from St. Louis, it doesn't matter what the genre is, he puts it in the rotation and pumps it, and this thing just runs and runs and runs. And I've been close enough to the guy for a while. He was, doing some things at Gaslight, and we were doing some co-events, and he's just a hard worker, right? And anytime it would come up within, quote, the cool kid camp, it was extremely dismissive. And this is where St. Louis gets in its own way.
Yeah.
KDHX and what all these individuals were fighting for was noble. It was real.
Yes.
It was something that was tangible, and there was a good fight.
Yeah.
But we often have other ways and tools and devices and shows and dates in which we can support the broader music scene, and let's just call a spade. They don't. We don't. The support for your buddy that you may or may not even listen to their Spotify single when it comes out, because look, numbers don't lie. Everybody talks about how much we love each other here. You drop a new single. Look, I'll make it personal. When Dana's post, death first single came out that we finished, at his memorial, there's 500 people at his memorial. There's thousands of people reaching out to me to say, "Oh my God, I loved your brother. He was the greatest songwriter." Blah 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 blah. Right?
Yeah.
Single drops, and I think even to this day, it's not even at like 800, 900 spins. It's like that's not real.
Yeah. Well,
and here's where I'm going with this. You can extrapolate that out, and it's like the KDHX fight was easy. It was an easy public fight that everybody could kind of chime in. But there's so many other ways to support music in this community that has been and continues to be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the disconnect? Why do you think that is? And I get it. Every music city, quote, look, if it's an urban city, period, they're all complaining about the same thing. Why are the cover bands getting paid, but my original music isn't getting any love?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's so prevalent here?
It's easy. It's apathy. It's all of those things wrapped into one. I mean, look, you're in a band, you bust your ass. I mean, I'm older than pretty much all these bands that are playing right now, and I've been doing it a really, really long time. I think there's just almost a frustrated resignation in a lot of ways about it. It's still a thriving music scene. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's still bands playing. There's still new bands breaking at places like Heavy Anchor and these smaller clubs that are on Cherokee, things like that. I mean, stuff is happening. But I think we have a hard time. I think we are getting comfortable. I think we are not willing to go out. Back to the point about technology. Live shows are great, but do people really go out that much to do it? Unless it's a major artist who, then it's an event. It's not about the music. It's an event. But to really break and do it, let's go back to the times of Tupelo. We used to go to Cicero's all the time. We saw them there a ton. We opened for them. My band opened for them down at Cicero's.
Pale Divine at Kennedy's.
Yeah, right. Pale Divine, or Boomers or wherever it was down there. Yeah. But I think there was, it was a thing. And I don't think we have that. I think we're disenfranchised.
I agree.
Yeah. And I think part of what KDHX did bring.
And go ahead. Finish your thought. KDHX brought.
They brought exposure. They brought the opportunity, the conduit, for these bands to be able to say, hey, yeah, we're playing it, here's some of this music. And these DJs would go, fuck yeah, we'll play this for you. We'll play this for you. And I think that's how people got exposed to it. And that's how the music moved forward here. We don't have it. And I'm not saying it's just KDHX. I'm saying that there is an apathy among the culture and among the community when it comes to music sometimes.
So that's a great transition. I want to get into the current events, because apathy, as I see it, is also an issue of perception is reality when it comes to St. Louis as well. What you were describing, the days of going to Cicero's, going down to the basement, going to Kennedy's, et cetera,
right,
to see those bands that ultimately did thrive and did slingshot to the next level on a multitude of different levels.
Right.
You had a culture. You had individuals. I was living in Granite City at the time, right? And I'm coming across McKinley, and and I'm meeting people from all over the area, et cetera. And these neighborhoods, these venues, the Landing, because at that time you had Kennedy's and Sundeckers, and Mississippi Nights obviously was the crown jewel.
Right.
The Landing was packed every freaking weekend,
all the time.
Let's fast forward to now. The Landing is non-existent.
The Loop is.
The Loop is doing well.
Well, everything west, you go past Clayton, you get these little pockets of shit happening. You've got South City is still vibrant. Even though it's sporadic, and even though shit's closed down because of COVID and moved back up.
There's a certain amount of sustainability that is occurring within certain neighborhoods. South City is one of them.
No question.
You're not going to see a lot of transplants or travelers that are coming to those shows. Like when I go down to the Golden Record, which I love that room, and John and crew over there, they're booking cool shows. And I have a rule of thumb. I don't pay the Palooza prices ever anymore. If it's a big artist and an artist that I do like, for example, I love Chris Stapleton. Mm-hmm. If Stapleton's in town and somebody wants to offer me a ticket, 1,000%, I'll stand on the fence at the top of the hill. I don't care. I am never paying those prices. So I have my own personal rule. $25 tickets, 25 and below. If it's 25 and below show and it's touring artists, Jeremy Albino just played at Golden Record. Check him out. Unbelievable dude. I'll do that. But here's my point. I'm a lone traveler. When I go into that room, it is, poorly attended, and most of the attendees are either...
It's fucking disheartening sometimes. I'm sorry.
And well, here's where I'm going with this. Whether it's the shiny light coming out of the tunnel, yesterday Kara Spencer won the mayoral race.
Yeah,
defeating
64-36 was the spread.
Oh my God, not even close.
Yeah.
Tashara Jones, 4 years.
What does that tell you?
It tells you that social media is 1,000% wrong, 1,001% of the time. Diss tracks and all. That doesn't. Politics is about perception. So when you see this change, you're a city guy. And you start to tie it to what we've been talking about as far as eliminating the apathy or trying to create activation. None of these venues, none of these bands are ever going to thrive if you do not start to bring in those that live outside of the city limits. Mm-hmm. You got to get back to that. Do you view the recent election and just some of the tangent optics, be it St. Louis City SC, what they're doing with that stadium,
right?
Some of the changes, some of the new, Ballpark Village, love it or hate it, it's bringing a fuck ton of people.
You bet.
Grade this mayoral election as it pertains to the potential of, quote, the scene of shows, of trying to revitalize some of these venues and districts.
There's a little parallel going on. I think with Kara getting elected, one of the things about it is we've just ejected apathy. I think, say what you want about Tashara Jones. One way or the other, she was treading water more than anything. I think she got herself into hot water. I think, you could make the same parallel with KDHX, right? But what Kara Spencer's doing and will do, I believe, is be able to galvanize the city a little bit more, to be able to make it a more viable destination for its residents to go here and there and here and there instead of avoiding neighborhoods and doing that. It will make the neighborhoods a little bit more self-aware. And I believe it's going to bring a little bit more pride and a little bit more action within the city. Whether you're going to see a show, going to a restaurant, whatever it might be, I think she's going to provide some ways to do this, some avenues to be able to, kind of bring our city back up a little bit. I don't know if we're ever going to solve what's happening downtown. That's an implosion. It's happening around the country, though. This is 60s, 70s down there, and it's not that way anymore. People are spreading out. They want to get away from crime. They want to do all that. What I think Kara can do is probably not turn the tide, but slow the tide considerably, and be able to get people to appreciate where they live within the city and be part of the solution, not just simply complain about the problem. We are exceptional at that. As it relates to music, I think part of that will go along with that. I think that you're going to see, to your point, people in the county do need to come in more, but they're not going to come in if they don't feel safe. The bottom line is, I'm not going to go see anybody. I don't give a fuck if it's Stapleton. I don't care if it's
Manis Brothers.
It could be anybody. Yeah, right. Yeah. Melody Den. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. My bad.
But no. But nobody's going to come in because if they don't feel safe, they don't want to deal with the fucking parking. They don't want to. There's always a reason. Until one of those things gets addressed and addressed in a sizable and significant way, you're not going to have that same attendance that's going on for smaller local, venues and bands, which is a shame because we didn't have those issues back in the 90s. That's the reason those bands took off. That's the reason you had such loyal people. Went to the Landing because you could fit 200 fucking people into Boomers or 200 people into Kennedys, and you could watch a show, and that's how these bands got up. You're not seeing that, and it's not happening. And it may again. I don't know. I mean, I'm getting off the tangent a little bit.
No.
But
I mean,
I think Kara is a good change for the city. I truly believe that. I don't even work for I don't work for her. I voted for her. I don't know her personally, but I believe that she has the city's interest at heart. And I think there are a lot of people. I am friends with a few of the aldermen, and they're like, absolutely. She's passionate. That's something you don't see in St. Louis too often, is it?
No, for sure. In her recent roots, I mean, she was born in the city. She's a city girl, but she's been down on Cherokee for a long time.
Yep.
In Cherokee, I don't think it's crossed over the positive tipping point, but it is getting closer with time. I mean, it loses businesses, but it picks up businesses.
It's to me, that is maybe sort of the crux point of this city right now, because there are good restaurants, there are good venues, there are great places to go, great bars, cool place. I was just down at what's the one that's in right at the very end of Cherokee before Lamp, the new one. Oh, starts with a P. Saturn Lounge.
Yeah,
Saturn Lounge.
Yeah, right on the corner there.
Freaking amazing. Yeah, and it's run by Doug Morgan, who was a KDHX alum, and fantastic place, really cool. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that, and you're seeing a lot more of that on Cherokee and in the South, because I think there's some people who are willing to take some risks. I know.
No, I got you. I had my finger on the button. I'm ready to go, dude. Yeah. No, Mark, I appreciate your time, dude.
Absolutely.
Congrats on the new release, Gospel Karma.
Come see the band.
Yeah, you guys have a date. What's the date?
We've got one. We've got a set on April. I think April 18th. We've got a set at Heavy Anchor that we're doing. We're sandwiched in between one local, one touring, and that should be fun. And then we've got June 7th at Pop's Blue Moon, and we didn't even get to the Porch concerts, but that's a whole different one.
Well, I'll have you back, man. We'll talk. I love
Sounds
Porch
good.
Because Porch concerts are just kind of the stepsister of rooftop concerts.
That's it. That's all they are, and only 2 blocks away.
All right, we're out of here. Tell me you're joking. That's all you need to know about KDHX. And if you have differing opinions or you think we're completely full of shit, feel free to message me. I got a mic saved for you. Like, review, follow, share. Out of here. Leaving with a little no depression from the Uncle Tupelo. Catch you next time.
In this dark hour of midnight near